The horror world is one that is so often famed for its survivors, just as much as it is for its classic villains. For every Michael Myers, there's a Laurie Strode. For every Freddy Krueger, there's a Nancy Thompson. For every Ghostface, there's a Sidney Prescott. And for every Jason Voorhees, there's, well, a ridiculous amount of disposable teens who will end up dead before somebody ultimately makes it out of Camp Crystal Lake alive. The thing is, for some of those fortunate to make it out of their respective movies with their life intact, it's not always sunshine and rainbows that await them. Instead, sometimes it's gore, misery, and a bunch of other terrible things. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are horror movies that brutally punish survivors. David and Judy, The Crazies, 2010. 2010's The Crazies was one of those rare remakes that managed to be just as good as, if not better than, the original movie. In this case, George A. Romero's 1973 picture of the same name. Set in Ogden Marsh, Iowa, our two central protagonists are local sheriff David Dutton and his pregnant doctor wife Judy. When some of the townsfolk of Ogden Marsh start acting erratic and aggressive, the Duttons discover that the reason for this behavior is a contaminated water supply caused by a military aircraft crashing in the local river. From there, Ogden Marsh is completely cut off from the outside world. Soldiers swoop in, and then an eventual order is given to kill off the entire population of the town rather than risk this infection spreading. In a race against the clock, the finale of The Crazies finds David and Judy in a semi-truck, looking to outrun the impending nuclear blast that will wipe out their town. Succeeding in getting enough distance between themselves and this blast, the pair get ready to start a new life in nearby Cedar Rapids. However, while the Duttons set off on foot to start afresh, the audience is shown that the military is monitoring them, with it implied that David and Judy will soon have another almighty fight on their hands. Marty Gaines, Hell Night. On face value, Linda Blair's Marty Gaines in Hell Night hasn't been through anything more traumatic than your average slasher movie. The thing is, it's the way that Blair sells her despair and distress at the movie's close that hammers just how damaged Marty is from here on out. Tom DeSimone's 1981 picture is formulaic in terms of its plot, with a bunch of college kids having to spend the night in an old manor house as part of some fraternity ritual. While there, the group are hunted down by a deformed killer that ends up murdering everyone in sight, bar Blair's Marty, with it also revealed how there had been two killers working in tandem throughout. With her friends, love interest, and one of the killers all dead, Marty escapes through a maze, has to pry car keys from the hand of her dead beau, and is then attacked by the remaining murderer as she looks to drive to safety. After a scuffle, the nutjob killer ends up fatally impaled on a spike from the manor's gate. As the sun starts to rise, the final image is of Marty walking towards the camera, as Linda Blair goes through a whole variety of emotions that hit home just how impacted she is from this traumatic experience. Anna, Kenneth, Nicole, Terry, and Chips, Dawn of the Dead, 2004. Some would argue that Zack Snyder's feature directorial debut, Dawn of the Dead, is the filmmaker's finest work to date. Going even further, some even offer up the opinion that this 2004 remake is a better movie than George A. Romero's iconic 1978 Dawn. Whether it surpasses Romero's picture or not, it's hard to say that Snyder's Dawn isn't a fine movie in its own right. And one key component to that success is in how the remake forever keeps you on your toes. Even when victory has seemingly been achieved in Snyder's film, there's a caveat waiting right around the corner. The absolute best example of this is how the do-over ends, with Anna, Kenneth, Nicole, Terry, and Chips the dog having managed to escape the undead masses and make their escape to freedom on a yacht. The credits of the 2004 movie have a gut punch lined up. As those credits play, we see our survivors' journey to safety showcased. Shot on camcorder, low running supplies see the group arrive on an island to source more goodies, only then to be greeted by a fresh batch of zombies as our hero's ultimate fate is left ambiguous. Ed Jr., The Mutilator. You'd hit the bottle too if you had to go through what Ed Jr. does in 1984's The Mutilator. Ed and his girlfriend Pam are the only two survivors of this picture, and to do that meant doing the unthinkable for Jr., which in this case meant killing his father. As The Mutilator opens, we see a young Ed Jr. accidentally kill his smiley cake baking mother when he unfortunately fires a loaded gun that he was polishing. With that traumatic event already something he's had to deal with, the film jumps ahead to Ed as a a young adult who soon finds he and his friends stalked by a mysterious killer. When asked by his father to lock up the family's beachfront condo, it's here that Ed and his pals are methodically monitored and brutally murdered in all kinds of gnarly ways. By the final few moments of the movie, that's when Ed is greeted by the realization that the person responsible for these deaths is his father, Big Ed. In order to survive the ordeal, Ed has to watch his father be cut in half after he and Pam impale him with a car. So having been responsible for the death of both your mother and father, it's totally understandable that Ed Jr. might be seen drowning his sorrows. Tommy Jarvis. Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Franchise favorite Tommy Jarvis survived the onslaught of Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th, the final chapter, but at what cost? Played by Corey Feldman in this 1984 offering, Tommy actually ends up killing Jason in a frenzied attack that sees the youngster lose his mind. Chillingly butchering his own hair to give him a resemblance to Jason as a boy, Jarvis violently, maniacally, and erratically carves up Jason with machete slice after machete slice. Like, seriously, this is one of cinema's most "he's already dead" moments, with Tommy just brutalizing the fallen Voorhees over and over again while screaming "die" at the top of his lungs. The final chapter ends with Tommy giving his sister a hug as he eerily stares directly into the camera. And from there, the following year's Friday the 13th, A New Beginning picks things up with a psychologically scarred Jarvis who is permanently on edge. Skip ahead even further, Friday the 13th Part 6 Jason Lives has an obsessed Tommy Jarvis digging up the corpse of Jason in order to make sure he's dead, which stupidly leads to the decaying body of Voorhees being brought back to life after being hit by lightning. Sidney Prescott, Scream 3. While Scream's Billy Loomis once berated Sydney for her mother, quote, flashing her all over town like she was Sharon Stone, the truth is that said flashing actually took place in Hollywood. This was one of the big reveals of Scream 3, with it detailed how Sid's mum's time attempting to make it as an actress saw her get pregnant with a baby she'd immediately abandoned. Sydney may have survived the previous two movies, but she's been put through the ringer so much. Her mother had been killed prior to that first Scream, her best friend Tatum died during Scream, her other best friend Randy bit the bullet during Scream 2, her boyfriend Derek was similarly offed in that sequel, and then there's the whole trauma of constantly being stalked by the figure of Ghostface. Now on top of this, Scream 3 throws out the curveball that Sydney's mother Maureen not only gave away her son, but that she refused to acknowledge Sid's half-brother Roman when he tracked her down, which is what then set in motion the events of the entire franchise. As a cherry on top, Neve Campbell's character then has to kill this brother who she never knew existed. Beth Salinger, Hostel Part 2. By the time Hostel Part 2 concludes, the last shot we see is of Lauren German's Beth beheading the person who had lured her and her two friends to Slovakia. Beth is one of the three unfortunate tourists whose life had been put up for auction by the infamous Elite Hunting Group, and she's the only one of the trio to make it out of the movie alive. To do that though, the kicker is that Beth has to become part of the Elite Hunting Group, and that means taking a life. To be fair, the life taken is that of Stuart, the person who'd won the auction to kill Beth. Still, regardless of whether he had it coming or not, the fact that Beth was forced to commit murder is something that would clearly trouble any normal person. So in order to be the survivor that she ultimately ended up being, Beth also had to become a bona fide killer. A bona fide killer who also had to deal with the knowledge that her two friends had been slaughtered in the most brutal of ways. Cameron, Last Girl Standing. Last Girl Standing isn't a movie that just punishes its sole survivor. It's a film that spends the vast majority of its runtime exploring the psychological fallout of having survived a run-in with a masked killer. For Cameron, the opening act of this Benjamin R. Moody effort sees her manage to escape from the clutches of a killer who'd murdered all of her friends. Following that, Last Girl Standing jumps forward to detail how this traumatic event influences Cameron's day-to-day life. Rerunning the terrors of that fateful night in her head on a daily basis, our central protagonist here now lives a life of isolation that sees her bounce between her one-bedroom apartment and her laundromat job, all forever in a paranoid state about what threats may be lurking around each and every corner. Here, audiences get to see firsthand what happens when the boogeyman is beaten and what it does to its survivor, all as Cameron's mental state declines as Last Girl Standing plays out. If we're looking at films that punish their survivors, it's impossible to not shine a spotlight on Last Girl Standing, but that's the focus of a solid 90% of this movie. Ashley J. Williams, Evil Dead 2. Widely regarded as one of the greatest sequels in horror, a sequel that also serves as a loose remake, Evil Dead 2 is a rough-all ride for Bruce Campbell's Ashley J. Williams. Having had to battle his possessed friends, lost his right hand, and been traumatized by yet more Deadite shenanigans, Ash receives a stern swift kick to his nether regions as Evil Dead 2 draws to a close. Just as Ash thinks he survived this demonic onslaught, he's slapped around the face by a portal opening up and dragging his Oldsmobile, and the demon into what turns out to be the year 1300 AD. After the fight of his life, Ash now finds himself transported back in time, heralded as a savior, as he agonizingly screams out no over and over at the realization of his fate. It's one thing to survive, but it's absolutely not groovy whatsoever to have survived only to be thrown back in time to an entirely different century, complete with the knowledge that you're likely going to have to battle a whole lot more Deadites before all is said and done.